From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
My name is Emma Snyder, and as the Executive Director of the Penn-Faulkner Foundation, it's my absolute pleasure to open this final event of the District of Literature on behalf of not only Penn-Faulkner, but the Library of Congress and the Folger Shakespeare Library. All three of our organizations exist specifically because of DC's rich literary history, and we all persist because of DC's vibrant community of writers and readers who are represented so richly here tonight. The District of Literature was created to celebrate both this very sense of community and this very city. And today this has happened through the collaboration of, first and foremost, Rob Casper of the Library of Congress and Terry Cross Davis of the Folger Shakespeare Library. Together, we, along with the American Poetry Museum, Split This Rock, 826 DC, DC Writers' Homes, the Writers' Center, the Hill Center, and Slate, brought to everyone a series of readings and panels that were fascinating. It was all supported by a generous grant from the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. In short, this was a community effort. And the day-long celebration of literature that resulted concludes here tonight with all of you. The day has been a thoughtful one. We've done a lot of questioning. We've questioned how we record our city as both a place of politics and one of protest. We've questioned how we frame and reframe narratives that are both public and private. We've talked about what it's like to live in a city where you're so consistently confronted by both the mythic and the conflicted senses of cultural identity that surround us. People have asked, how do you write bureaucracy that's sexy? And maybe the most recurring question was, how do writers who are of this place convey Washington, D.C. as a home, not as a capital? How do we take on the authority of knowledge that comes not from research, but from lived experience, knowing that Pennsylvania Avenue becomes Independence, that there is no Georgetown Metro stop, that the best view in this city is from the windows of Cardozo High School? The four writers you are going to hear tonight speak with that authority. We'll start with Elizabeth Alexander, whose incisive and deeply felt poetry inaugurated Barack Obama in 2009, and who was raised in the District of Columbia and returns to us this evening. Then we'll hear from Edward P. Jones, who is so deeply of the district, and who has chronicled our city in terms that have this exacting clarity about both the places and the people that make up our neighborhoods. We'll hear from Ethelbert Miller, a poet and a memoirist who has been a mainstay in the DC literary community since he first adopted it as his hometown, and whose literary activism has energized so many of us within this town. And finally, we'll hear from George Pelecanos, whose 20 best-selling novels have all been set on our streets and in our bars and in our restaurants and in our front yards. For some of us, these writers introduced us to the district. For others of us, they introduced our town to the world. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce them to you tonight. Elizabeth Alexander.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. It's great to be a few blocks from where I grew up. And one of the things that today proves about Washington, D.C. is that it's always summer in Washington, D.C. Or so it seemed. As I say, I'm from the tropics. So this poem is about this exact time of year in this town, and it's called Equinox. Now is the time of the year when bees are wild and eccentric. They fly fast and in cramped loop-de-loops. Dive bomb clusters of conversants in the bright late September out of doors. I have found their dried husks in my clothes. They are dervishes because they are dying, One last sting, a warm place to squeeze a drop of venom or of honey. After the stroke we thought would be her last, my grandmother came back, reared back, and slapped a nurse across the face. Then she stood up, walked outside, and lay down in the snow. 2 years later, there is no other way to say, we are waiting. She is silent, light as an empty hive, and she is breathing. That same grandmother, Winona Bon Logan, was originally from Alabama and then spent much of her childhood in Washington, D.C. And she attended Dunbar High School in its heyday. And you hear about that and are forever an undereducated person if you have someone in your family who went to Dunbar in its heyday. So no Greek. She said to me at one point, no Greek. No Greek. I have no Greek. So some of those ladies appear in this poem, which is called Penmanship. I notice older women have better penmanship than I do. Smooth and even, free from stray hairs, readable, learned by copying lessons onto wide-ruled paper in marbleized notebooks. The product of discipline, of knowing what was expected and then doing it. I would have done it too then. My blue cursive crazes the white letter paper. I cannot read you, friends shriek back in neater hand as intimate as pica or block print. In grade school, I painted wild-eyed art class sunsets with tempera colors absent from nature, finger paints. One bold boyfriend returned typed letters to sender. Long before teacher training school, grandmother's friends made miles and miles of M's with camel humps that grazed the middle dotted line. Humps swelled with plenty of water to go across deserts and deserts of vast first halves of alphabets. Each uppercase Q, a perfect backward 2. Commas swam off the page. A favorite teacher's purple curlicues startle my essays with snarled lines and no Rosetta Stone. I'm trying to neaten up my hand, my open classroom flower power hand. Am I creeping in from the margins? Am I now current, legible, when gold foil stars are not enough, nor penmanship? 19. That summer in Culpeper, all there was to eat was white. Cauliflower, flounder, white sauce, white ice cream. I snuck around with an older man who didn't tell me he was married. I was the baby, drinking rum and coke while the men smoked reefer they'd stolen from the campers. I tiptoed with my lover to poison-ivied fields, camp vans. I never slept. Each fortnight I returned to the city, black and dusty, with a garbage bag of dirty clothes. At 19, it was my first summer away from home. His beard smelled musty, his eyes were black. The ladies love my hair, he'd say, and like a fool, I'd smile. He knew everything about marijuana, how dry it had to be to burn, how to crush it, sniff it, how to pick the seeds out. He said he learned it all in Vietnam. He brought his son to visit after one of his days off. I never imagined a mother. Can I steal a kiss, he said, the first thick night in the field. I asked and asked about Vietnam, how each scar felt, what combat was like, how the jungle smelled. He listened to a lot of Marvin Gaye, was all he said, and grabbed between my legs. I'd creep to my cot before morning. I'd eat that white food. This was before I understood that nothing could be ruined in one stroke. A sudden storm came hard one night. He bolted up inside the van. The rain sounded just like that, he said, on the roofs there. We invoked earlier today, it was wonderful to hear the reading where other poets' work was invoked and reinterpreted and read to and against. And so this poem begins with an epigraph from a DC poet named Waring Cuney. Letter Blues. His epigraph goes, those great lake winds blow all around. I'm a light coat man in a heavy coat town. Yellow freesia arc like twining arms. I'm buying shower curtains, smoke alarms. And Washington and you, love, states away. The clouds are flat, the sky is going gray. I'm fiddling with the juice jug, honey pot, white chrysanthemums that I just bought. At home, there is a violet 3D moon and Pachysandra vines for me to prune, and old men with checkered shirts, suspenders, paper bags, and cuddy bottles, menders of frayed things and balding summer lawns, watching TV baseball, shelling prawns. The women that we love, their slit-eyed ways of telling us to mind, pop-eyed dismays. We need these folks, each one of them, we do. The insides of my wrists still ache with you. Does the South watch over wandering ones under different moons and different suns? I have my mother's copper ramekin, a cigar box to keep your letters in. At least the swirl ceilings are very high and the supers rummy, sort of sly. I saw a slate branch tree sway from the roots. I've got to buy some proper winter boots. So many boxes, crates and crates of books. I must get oil soap, bleach, and picture hooks. A sidewalk crack in Washington, D.C. will feed my city dirt roots. Wait for me. As you know, if you lived in DC at a certain time, the radio, I don't know if this is still true, but there was all kinds of stuff on the radio, used to be. I don't know, is the Bama Hour, does that still happen in DC? No, is that a yes or a no? Oh, well, it did used to happen, and you'd hear all kinds of amazing stories and things, and you turn on the radio and people would just be talking. And I loved that when I was little. So this is called Talk Radio DC. This is actually a found poem. As told to. Leave fat back and a copper penny on a wound till it draw out the poison, till the penny turn green. Tobacco's what works on a bee sting, but for poison ivy, I'm serious now. Catch your first morning urine in your hands and splash it on that rash. When they had that diphtheria epidemic, I was burning up with fever, burning and burning. When the doctor left the house, my grandmother snuck in the back door with a croaker sack of mackerel. She wrapped me all up in that salt mackerel. The next morning, my fever had broke and the fish was all cooked. So, you know, when you grow up here also, the government is real in so many ways. And the government is being ever so real, and I say that in the pejorative sense today. And what you know when you're in DC is that your next door neighbor won't go to work tomorrow if they close down the government. It's not an abstract thing, right? So there's a reference in here to the senators. Summertime. Where we live, there are caged peacocks in summertime, heavy in the heat, bald-headed, dragging their tails, which once a season they unfurl. Objects wrinkle in the heat waves rising from the pavement. A dead rat in the back alley gets a proper burial from a girl who can flip her eyelids inside out. And at the funeral, I wear my white go-go boots and sing, I Gotta Be Me. We buy coverless comic books, cut rate, impossibly red vending machine pistachios which stain our hands, a hydrant illicitly opened, kids riding the hard spray, caught in the rainbow of water. On television, senators talk, talk, talk. A Whammo Super Ball bounces off a sidewalk crack and into the cosmos. A red rubber planet could bounce to the sky and stick. What I'm telling you. If I say my father was Betty Shabazz's lawyer, the poem can go no further. I've given you the punchline. If you know who she is, all you can think about is how and what you want to know about me, about my father, about Malcolm, especially in 1990 when he's all over t-shirts and medallions. But what I'm telling you is that Mrs. Shabazz was a nice lady to me. I loved her name for the wrong reasons, Shabazz. And what I remember is going to visit her daughters in 1970 in a dark house with little furniture and leaving with a candy necklace the daughters gave me to keep. Now that children see his name and call him Malcolm 10, and someone called her Mrs. Exis, and they don't really remember who he was or what he said or how he smiled the way it happened when it did, and neither do I. I think about how history is made more than what happened. and about a nice woman in a dark house filled with daughters and candy, something dim and unspoken, expectation. Fugue, 1, Walking, 1963, after the painting by Charles Alston. You tell me knees are important. You kiss your elders' knees in utmost reverence. The knees in the painting are what send the people forward. Once progress felt real and inevitable, as sure as the taste of licorice or lemons. The painting was made after marching in Birmingham, walking into a light both brilliant and unseen. 2, 1964. In a beige silk sari, my mother danced the frug to the Peter Duchin Band. Earlier that day at Maison Le Pelche on Capitol Hill, which is no longer, the French ladies twisted her magnificent hair into a fat chignon while Mademoiselle watched, drank sugared milky tea, and counted bobby pins disappearing in the thickness as the ladies worked in silence, adornment so grave, the solemn toilette, and later the bath, and later red lipstick, and later l'air du temps. My mother without glasses, my mother in beige silk, my mother with a chignon, my mother in her youth. 3, 1968. The city burns, we have to stay at home. TV always interrupted with fire or helicopters. Men who have tweedled my cheeks once or twice join the serial dead. Yesterday I went downtown with Mom. What a pretty little girl, said the tourists who were white. My shoes were patent leather, all shiny and black. My father is away saving the world for Negroes, I wanted to say. Mostly I go to school or watch television with my brother, my father often gone. He makes the world a better place for Negroes. The year is 1968. 4, 1971. Hey, blood, my father said then to other brothers in the street. Hey, young blood, how you doing? Peace and power, he says, and keep on keeping on, just like Gladys Knight and the Pips. My stomach jumps, a thrill. Sometimes poems remember small things like, hey, blood. My father still says that sometimes. 5, The Sun King, 1974. James Hampton, the Sun King of Washington, D.C., erects a tinfoil throne. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Altar, pulpit, light bulbs. My 14th and U, my 34 bus, my weekday winos, my white robe black Israelites on their redstone stoops, my graffiti, Anna the Leo as ice, my neon James Brown poster coming to the DC Coliseum where all I will see is the circus, my one visit to RKO Keith's Theater to see Car Wash, and a bird flew in, and Mania, frantic black shadow on the screen. I was out of the house in a theater full of black folks, black people, black movie, black bird. I was out, I was free. I was at RKO Keith's Theater at 14th and U, and it was not Car Wash. It was the first Richard Pryor concert movie. And a bird flew in the screen, and memory is romance, and race is romance. And the Sun King lives in Washington, D.C. The Black Woman Speaks. And this is, there's a beautiful photograph of the artist Elizabeth Catlett in 1946, and that's what occasioned this poem. She too was a Dunbar High School person. The Black Woman Speaks, Elizabeth Catlett. I am 32, and the love of my life, and my great work, and my 3 sons, and my new nation are ahead of me. Goodbye, Chicago. About to set out for the territory, Mexico, for the rest of the century and into the next. My sense of my people will strengthen and shift. But first, I had to leave D.C. You have to leave D.C., lovely colored town that will make a colored girl smile but not stretch or growl or frown with the exertion of work. Yet there I made my first carving from a cake of ivory soap at Dunbar High School. There I was taught. There I stood in front of the United States Supreme Court with a noose around my neck protesting lynching. There I realized I had a debt I had not paid. I am black because my great-great-grandmother was kidnapped on a beach in Madagascar. In Mexico, I will carve black women's bodies and heads from red stone and black stone. The work will make me sweat. The black woman's head is a massive weight. The black woman's head holds the black woman's brain. The black woman's work is the work of this world. And just two more. From another photograph of Stokely Carmichael and Adam Clayton Powell that was taken in the halls of Congress, in keeping with our theme. And it's an amazing picture. They're laughing at something that we don't know what they're laughing at. And you wouldn't necessarily, in some versions of that period of time, of the 1960s, think of those two people as coming together, but indeed they did. Stokely and Adam. And Adam Clayton Powell in the picture is wearing a black suit, and Stokely Carmichael is wearing a white suit. You can imagine the visuals. Stokely says now. Adam says soon. Stokely says straight ahead. Adam says to the side. Stokely says black power. Adam says power. Stokely says global. Adam says Harlem is the center of the world. Stokely, sweet potatoes. Adam, sweet potato pie. Adam, don't buy where you can't work. Stokely, freedom ride. Stokely says, yeah. Adam says, yeah. Adam says, preach. Stokely says, talk. Agitate, agitate, agitate. Adam says, inside the system. Stokely says, the system will bite you in the ass. Adam says, you think I don't know that? Adam says, even inside is outside. Adam and Stokely, us black folks, got to stick together. Stokely, we had only the old language of love and suffering. Adam, keep the faith, baby. Sugar in their eyes, ketchup in their hair. I was burning, said Stokely Carmichael, witnessing the kids at the lunch counters. Why I do what I do, why I burn, why I work, said Adam Clayton Powell, why I serve. And just to finish, and I'm so happy to be here and happy to be with my fellow readers and happy to be with my mama and happy to be with all of you. This is just a little poem called In D.C. In D.C., there are black women with golden afros and African print jumpsuits. Sidewalks sizzle in summer, a languid, loving fizz, a hey girl hissing from the streets, ambient, hey girl on all sides. Walk up and down Georgia Avenue or Florida Avenue or Columbia Road. How you doing? Hey. You never know what you will miss when you leave, what will call you back, what will disappear forever or what was never there, quite as you now see it, hear it, write it, in memory's poem. Thank you.
There is nothing that raises my temperature more than reading in public. Mayor Marion Barry, during his press conferences, made good use of his handkerchief. I don't carry handkerchiefs. I just carry a nice supply of paper towels. So I better take off my coat and hope I don't forget it. So I'll ask your indulgence about the paper towels in advance. I'm going to read the first pages of a story called The Devil Swims Across the Anacostia River. Some 14 years after a grandmother walked out into the Atlantic Ocean on her way to heaven, Laverne Shepard went into the Safeway on Good Hope Road Southeast and for the first time came face to face with the devil. That morning in the store, she had, like so many times before, taken a shopping cart from just inside the door and maneuvered it to the aisle farthest to the left. She neared a face-high display of canned pinto beans and glanced at a short shopping list after she took it from her sweater pocket. And when she looked up from the list of 4 or so items, the devil was before her. She stopped, not out of fear, but because to go any farther would have meant running into him with a cart. Himself been studying you, the devil said. Laverne looked down at her wedding ring on the hand resting on the cart's handle. And when she raised her eyes, the devil was taking off his hat in that dramatic way men did in old movies to impress women who needed very little impressing. The devil was dressed in a splendid gray gabardine suit, and down through the metal rods of the empty cart, Laverne could see that on feet small enough to belong to a little girl, he wore two-tone black and white shoes. The knot of his purple tie was situated just so to the left of his Adam's apple, as if he dressed himself without the benefit of a mirror. There was an almost boyish quality to the off-center knot, and for a moment Laverne thought it would have been the most natural thing in the world for a woman, any woman, to reach over and center the knot and end the whole gesture with a final tap of the finger on the knot. There, that'll do you for a while. The tie was held in place against his white shirt with a ruby tie clip about the size of a candy fireball. Himself been studying you, the devil said again, now smiling. All the teeth in his head were perfect, exquisite white marvels that were an artwork all their own. The woman could spend all day and part of the next just laying about looking at them. Turn it a little bit and let me see how the light shine on them that way. Both her grandmothers had come to know the devil so well that he, in all his guises, called them always by their childhood nicknames. At various times in her life, Laverne's grandmothers had tried to tell her how she would know the devil that first time. It would be, they'd explained as best they could, the way you know that you're hungry or that you're thirsty. The body will say it, and you will take it as gospel. But they had not told her what to say, what to do, whether to run or go forward and attack him with the fury of an angel doing God's work. Once more the devil said, himself, been studying you. He came toward her, and as he did, he lowered the arm with the hat down to his side. The fedora was the same pleasing gray as his gabardine suit. The devil himself was the color of an everyday brown paper bag. He rested a hand on the side of the cart, less than a foot from where a red-ringing hand was resting, and turned down his smile a few degrees, turned it down in disappointment, as if he had come upon a long-lost friend, and the friend had denied knowing him. What? Vern said. What? She was 9 weeks pregnant with her second child, happy in all things, happy in her 25th year of life. The devil said, himself come all this way, come all the way across the river, swim all the way across that Anacostia, himself swim all the way to say, good morning, and say, how you do. She was still not afraid, but looked about, mostly with a strange wonder that they were at last together, and together in such an odd and bright place of food and people and things to clean the kitchen floor with. Only here at Safeway can you get the best bargain for your dollars. The sign on the display of canned pinto beans said 8 for $1. It occurred to Laverne that that might be a particularly good price, but she could not remember if her husband or son liked pinto beans. It was when she looked back at the devil that the smell of him came drifting her way, a non-threatening fragrance that didn't mind taking all the time it needed to get to her. It was a wonderful, though subtle cologne that for Laverne simply said everything good about men. Himself been studying you, the devil said, quietly now, as if he were sharing the great secret of her life. Laverne stepped away from the devil and the cart and walked uneasily out of the Safeway. She made her way a block and a half up Good Hope Road, and on a bench in front of Cleopatra's Hair Emporium, she sat, the crumpled shopping list in her left hand resting on the green bench. She was back in the world, back in life, and was so glad that she felt like reaching out and touching a body or two passing by Cleopatra's Hair Emporium. 2 women went into Cleopatra's, and one of the women was saying she really wanted some bangs, but her companion told her bangs would make her face look fat. But I really want them bangs, the first woman insisted before they closed the door to the Emporium. Laverne crossed her legs and with the tips of her fingers rearranged her skirt down over her legs. Himself been studying you. For the 3rd time that morning, she wished she had not stopped smoking. It was near about 12 o'clock. She considered calling her mother, or her mother's wealthy mother, who had known the devil mostly in his guise of an old woman for nearly 60 years. She turned her head and looked into the window of the beauty parlor. The woman who wanted the bangs was being seated in a chair 2 seats from the window. Laverne had, after the birth of her son, tried to do good to put off as long as possible this day, the day of meeting the devil, sending money to the Salvation Army, going to church every week until all that singing and preaching began to depress her, trying to banish impure thoughts. But all that good had not put off this day. She had paid little attention to the story that the devil had a special thing for the women on both sides of her family, a thing born with Eve. It was said that all the women in her family had the answer to a riddle that would make the devil the king of heaven. All he had to do was pose the riddle in the right way to the right woman, alive or dead, and the answer would send God tumbling from his throne and down to the narrow perch the devil had been consigned to for all history. Now the devil had knocked at her door. Laverne looked at the shopping list and then put it back in her sweater pocket and patted the pocket. A car going up Good Hope Road tooted its horn at her, but she did not hear it. After several minutes, she closed her eyes and took herself down Good Hope, across the bridge, and out through Washington, through Maryland, until she was on the August beach 14 years ago, the Atlantic Ocean only a few yards away, and the heat wave shimmering all along the dull blue horizon, one seagull conversing with another. She was wearing her cousin's bathing suit and sitting on the beach with her feet dug into the sand, snuggled close to her maternal grandmother, who was in her after-church all-day Sunday dress. And on the other side of the grandmother were Laverne's brothers, boys of 8 and 5 years. Laverne's father and mother had gone to a refreshment stand near the parking lot to buy snacks. The beach was full of colored people. What her grandmother had heard before she was compelled to stand up, Laverne never knew. But once her grandmother did stand up, the voice was clear for all the Negroes along the beach to hear. Only her grandmother, after putting on her shoes, moved toward the water and the voice. And, as if there were a silent command, those Negroes who had been swimming came out of the water and looked at the horizon from where the voice was coming. There was a kind of roar that seemed to ascend from the ocean, and another roar that seemed to descend from the sky. And there at eye level, the roars became words. The voice, emphatically clear and distinct, was not female, and it was not male. Laverne's grandmother hesitated, stopping a yard or more from the water, and the voice, without rebuke, asked the grandmother, "Did you come all this way to lose your faith, to drop down into the bottom of the sea? Ahead of you is this water, and behind you he's coming. Did you lose your faith?" "No," Laverne's grandmother said. "No, I stand on my 2 feet." Before she set off again, she turned around and from her pocketbook pulled out 3 $10 bills. She gave one to each of her grandchildren, which was unusual for a woman who had never given them more than 50 cents at any one time, lest they be corrupted. Laverne's youngest brother, a boy of easy giggles, looked suspiciously at the $10 bill. He was still at an age where he did not trust paper money. It could tear, it could burn, it could fly away with the wind. But he folded the bill as small as he could and tucked it into the pocket of his swimming trunks. Laverne's grandmother set off again, and the youngest brother said, "Granny, he gonna ruin your pretty shoes in all that water." The grandmother looked down, somewhat worried, as if deciding between her $12.95 Horn shoes and the command of the voice of the universe. "We have waited since the first day," the voice said with the greatest patience. "Have you not waited since the first day? Have you not waited with us?" Their grandmother looked at the boy, dark-skinned, bony, painfully perfect. He waved, though they were but a few yards apart. After several moments, the grandmother took a step and was standing where water met dry sand. She stopped, her brown patent leather pocketbook hanging from her left arm. Then, in a few more steps, she was standing a foot above the bottom of the sea. She continued walking, one uncertain step after another. All the Negroes along the beach were quiet, so that the loudest sound when the voice was silent was the ocean hitting the beach and then retreating. By now, Laverne's mother and father were back, followed by a lifeguard who was looking about as if there was something that would make more sense than an old woman walking on water. Laverne's father watched until his mother was about 5 yards out on the water, and then he said, "Mama." Haltingly, Laverne's grandmother turned around. "Ain't I always told you it might come to this?" she told her son. "I've done nothing that I couldn't clean up by the next day, and it was hard, but now I want to go and complain to somebody about it, then shut up for good. Then she said to Laverne's mother, Cheryl, you try to explain it to him, just to let him know I got something I have to do right now. Laverne's father moved toward the ocean. He was crying, but did not speak. He was joined by his wife, and she was followed by the lifeguard. The children had not moved since their grandmother handed them the money. The grandmother set off again. With each step, all the Negroes on the beach could see that she was gaining confidence. Still, the lifeguard, when the grandmother was more than 20 yards out into the sea, shouted to her with complete sincerity, Ma'am, you all right out there? You need some help? Not stopping, the grandmother raised her right arm and wiggled her fingers that she was fine. For all the purpose and certainty of her step, she could have been walking down 7th Street on her way to St. Aloysius Catholic Church. There was nothing on the ocean and the horizon except the old woman. Not a boat, not a buoy, and even the seagulls had disappeared from the air. When the grandmother was but a foot tall on the sea, her son sat down on the beach and refused to look anymore. When the grandmother was an inch or so, Laverne walked to the ocean's edge and raised a hand to shade her eyes, and her youngest brother came up beside her and put his hand in hers. The older brother took a place beside his father. Then, in the time it took to sigh, the grandmother was gone completely. There was no more that day for anyone, even though the sun was way up in the sky, and little by little the Negroes collected what they had brought to the beach and went back to their cars and buses. Now and again a stranger would come up to Laverne or a member of her family. The strangers did not speak, but simply touched a shoulder or hand in sympathy, in understanding. Laverne felt no sadness, and she slowly began to fear that she had not loved her grandmother as much as the old woman had always said she loved her. The family's eyes stayed focused on the horizon, where the grandmother had disappeared, and Laverne and her family remained on the beach until well after the sun was down, accompanied only by the lifeguard, who had caught a chill, but who felt it was his duty to stay with them. Yeah.
Sponge. On the corner, we called him Sponge because he didn't bleed like many of us who were shot several times and died too young to brag to show the healed flesh wounds on basketball courts in summertime, or to girls whose bodies covered ours on hot nights and voices slipped and fell with each breeze from one house to another. Sponge. Shot twice in the alley with Ellis, fell down and saw his hands absorb the blood of his brother like a straw. This was something that made us believe in Jesus, and others mentioned how Farrakhan was last seen being lifted up by a spaceship. In our school books, we searched for the first pages of this New Testament. I've always wanted a woman to be my lover. How can it be morning in two places at once? I was so happy when I moved into this house. Finally, a place where I can grow and hang my plants. Finally, a lover to love my difference and my sex. Her tongue discovering the secret parts of me. I have always wanted a woman to be my lover. How many men find this strange? Once my father found his way to my bed. He was not lost. I did not surrender. I fought and was beaten and wet my bed with his blood. Now, a woman holds a knife to my throat, and I am speechless. I did not know she would do such things. How unnatural for a woman to beat another woman after being lovers. Did she not whisper one night when I was in her arms, no man would ever treat me better? I open with poems about violence because I live in D.C. What do they do? What do torturers do when they return home? Do they make love to their wives and play with their kids? What hobbies do they have? Do they wash the car and take out the trash? Do they change their underwear? What do torturers see when they look in the refrigerator? When shopping, do they go to the front of the line? Do they get discounts on meat? Do torturers remember their anniversaries? Do they place candles on birthday cakes and blow them out? When torturers go to church, who do they pray to? When they get caught in traffic jams, do they curse their cars in front of them? Do they worry when they get dirt and blood under their fingernails? What type of deodorant do they use? When torturers leave a room, do they turn out the lights? Are they superstitious? Do they avoid stepping on sidewalk cracks? Do they read their horoscopes before going to work? How many torturers have 2 jobs? When lost, do they ask strangers for directions? Are they left-handed or right-handed? Do torturers sit in outdoor cafes and talk about torture? Do they suffer memory loss? Do they call in sick and say they can't report for work? How safe is a torturer's workplace? When they fall to sleep, do they snore? Do torturers keep everyone awake at night? I thought I would open with those poems. As you can see, they're connected. One deals with violence in the street. Another deals with violence that we sometimes don't hear about, and that's the violence, domestic violence within the lesbian community, which I drew that from an article that I read in the Boston newspaper one time. And then just this general violence that we see every time we look at the news or discover another country. I'm here from the South Bronx, and I never thought I would get this far south. I'm always reminded from the South Bronx that I'm in the South. When I came to go to Howard University, I knew I was in the South. I always reminded people that Frederick Douglass ran away from Maryland, so you get a sense of where D.C. is. I thought I would read a few poems dealing with maybe with slavery, and then come back and deal with some other things. These are 3 poems dealing with slavery. Taking flight with my imagination. So you're gone up north, where I hear there are still abolitionists. What is love but slavery? Is freedom still to be found in your arms? I fear a long winter, a gray sky, and much darkness. Still, the thought of you walking across the room naked brings light to my eyes. Tubman. I took a line from a Baraka's poem, Arm Yourself or Harm Yourself. Short woman with a gun, leading me through woods. Footprints left beside rivers. Freedom is a powerful thing. Sometimes you have to hold it in your hand and listen for the click. And this is when freedom comes. Nat Turner knocking on my door. I'm just a house Negro with a spoon. I wrote that poem to give you a sense of how I write. It's based on an incident at Howard University. It was during the takeovers back in around '69. And I remember we were in Cook Hall, me and Reggie Hudgens from Philadelphia. We ran down the door, knocking on people's door. Revolution's coming, revolution's coming, revolution's coming. And we knocked against the guy's door. We said, get your gun, get your gun. The guy said, I don't have no gun. And then he said, you are some crazy Negroes. And he's very successful these days. He was one of the guys who decided, I'm not going to follow you, Ethelbert, out here for changing Howard University. And I remember being in Cook Hall, and one of my friends had a gun. This was the first time I even saw a gun. And I told him, I said, man, I just want co-visitation. I don't want to shoot anybody. But those were the times here in Washington, D.C., and I'm part of that tradition. There were a number of poets who were mentioned, like today, Lucille Clifton, Langston Hughes. I have a lot in common with them, and what I have in common with them is that they didn't know how to drive. And if you don't know how to drive, then you are, shall we say, you talk about the devil, Ed? I don't know about the devil, but you don't know how to drive, you got to be on the 70 bus. And the 70 bus is hell. and so the 70 bus has changed my writing. My last book is called The Ear is an Organ Made for Love, and that's because of the 70 bus. What was happening is I would get on the 70 bus, and the language, the language is getting to me. And so, how many of you ever had your ears clean? Like really clean, and you can hear the next church over, when you get your ears clean. And so what happened, I said, well, I got to do something. So I started coming home and playing jazz, and when things got really bad, it went from got into like Ornette Coleman, then like Sun Ra, then Albert Eiler, you know what I'm saying? It really got bad. Really get in there and get that dirt. The ear is an organ made for love. It was a language that left us first. The great migration of words. When people spoke, they punched each other in the mouth. There was no vocabulary for love. Women became masculine, could no longer give birth to warmth or a simple caress with their lips. Tongues were overweight from profanity and the taste of nastiness. It settled over cities like fog, smothering everything in sight. My ears begged for camouflage and a chance to go to war. Everywhere was the decay of how we sound. Someone said it reminded them of the time Sonny Rollins disappeared. People spread stories of how the air would never be the same or forgive. It was the end of civilization, and nowhere could one hear the first notes of a love supreme. It was as if John Coltrane had never been born. This is Washington, short poem, Class Struggle with Wings. Birds fighting for food near my bench. Why do I feed them crumbs? So this is what the living do. When did we begin to wear sneakers to funerals or sports jerseys and caps? When did things begin to die? I pass a church 4 blocks from the Safeway. I see the last generation of old black men in suits. These men are professionals. They touch death every day. They carry the coffin and drive the hearse. They arrange the flowers and offer comfort. They escort you into limos and tell you where to sit. They know the directions to the cemetery. What do you know? I know that I am dying. Dreams first are what you might call the lint of disappointment. It has always been this way, this knowing, the realization that I will do this alone. I once believed in love the way I believed in beauty, the living with dignity, style, and grace. I thought my shoes always needed to be polished whenever I left the house. There's a way the day ends after you pass a funeral, how you walk down the street, afraid to look over your shoulder. They say, this is what the living do. I'm always looking at history. There's a famous picture of Houdini dangling upside down at one of the theaters here in Washington, and I started getting into Houdini, but taking Houdini's life and examining it from a different angle. Lessons from Houdini. You practice disappearing in front of a mirror. All your wife can see is your face. Magic is how your body vanished in bed. Once you practiced with knives and hats. The rabbit trick was a snap. Houdini comes back from the dead to explain how to escape from a trunk underwater. He tells you to hide a divorce in your marriage. Learn to pick the lock. Convince yourself there are no chains. Practice holding your breath. Count the years. Surface through the pain. And I read about 2 more poems. This is excerpts from the Lost Diary of the Black Houdini. I just made them a little different. And this is in 16 short couplets. 1. What if I told you slavery was nothing but a magic trick gone wrong? Would you believe me? 2. It was during segregation that I decided to hang myself upside down, my feet pointing north and upwards, my head still in the south. 3. There is no prison I cannot escape from. I've known blackness. 4. When I was a young boy, I was a runaway. I disappeared from the plantation and then history. 5. What is the difference between escape and erasure? How many times have I changed my name? 6. The color line makes us all acrobats. I learned to pass white folks without a net. 7. The crowds applaud after each performance. When they look into their mirrors, they see me. 8. I taught Marcus Garvey the hat trick. Everyone loves a parade. 9. King tells me his dream. I consult my dream book and find a page missing. 10. My father takes me to Coney Island. He tells me all of America is an amusement park. Learn to laugh or die. 11. Fame made me a race leader. I get paid for describing misery, not magic. 12. White teeth and a big smile. I hide the key under my tongue. 13. Let me tell you about metamorphosis. It will explain why I'm there and not here. 14. Love is a pair of handcuffs. Do I want to escape? Can I? 15. My mother died yesterday afternoon. All my life I've been trying to reach her. 16. I hold my breath and keep counting. How long can I survive underwater without love? And I'll end with, I'm in a church, so you have you have to bargain this one, but it's interactive. It's a good one because of what's going on in our government right now. So when I say money, you can, I'll just point to you say money. It's about the fact that many times since I've been here in Washington, I've sat on a lot of boards, and one of the concerns that we always had is raising money. And so I wrote this poem called Meetings. I'm sitting in another meeting where people are talking about money. They call this fundraising. We spend the time talking about people who have money. We mention names of people we don't know. This is what you do when you don't have money. You talk about people who do. Before the meeting ends, there's agreement among everyone to contact 3 people who have money. I leave the meeting knowing I won't make any calls. I walk down the street talking to myself. At the bus stop, I search my pockets for money. This, too, is fundraising. When the bus arrives, all the poor people board are on my way to another meeting. The poor people are going to work. A guy sitting in front of me is yelling on his cell phone. He's talking about money. He says, I don't give a, I want my money. This, too, is fundraising. And I think I'll end with, if I can find this, I thought I would end with this poem. It's actually in this book, and I hardly ever read it. I hope I can find this. Oh man, this is when you wish you had a Kindle or something. You could just go. Ah, here it is. And she's in the front row. I end with this poem, since you said you're moving. Elizabeth Alexander. I like to say your name because it sounds like an era or period in time when kingdoms were won or lost. Your name, a place where rumors turn to gold, where love is buried beneath desire. Thank you very much.
Hi, thanks for coming out tonight. Let's see, I was born in the Columbia Hospital for Women, and my folks grew up in this city. They went to Central High School, which is now Cardozo, and they lived in places like 5th and H in Chinatown, 8th and K Northeast, Georgia and Buchanan, Petworth, and 1745 Irving Street in Mount Pleasant, where I lived when I was a kid. 40 years ago, over an 18-month period in 1972 and 1973, 7 young women were killed in this city by one killer. And they were girls who lived on the other side of town. They lived in Northeast and Southeast, with the exception of one of the girls who lived in Northwest. All of them were strangled. 4 of them had the middle name of Denise. They were, after their murders, they were dressed in new clothing and dumped on roads that were kind of large roads, which like Baltimore Washington Parkway, Kenilworth Avenue. And subsequently, the killer became known as the Freeway Phantom. Now, except for real dyed-in-the-wool Washingtonians, this is largely forgotten today. People all over America know about the Boston Strangler, the Zodiac Killer in San Francisco. But I didn't think it should be forgotten. The killer was never found. So in 2006, I published a novel called The Night Gardener, which is based on this case. And what it is it's about what happens to the people who were trying to get this guy and never did get him, and how it impacted their lives. So the book starts out in 1985. Actually, it's bookended by 2 chapters in 1985, where we meet these homicide detective and 2 rookie patrolmen at the scene of a crime. So here we go. The crime scene was in the low 30s around E, on the edge of Fort DuPont Park, in a neighborhood known as Greenway in the 6th District section of Southeast DC. A girl of 14 lay in the grass on the side of a community vegetable garden that was blind to the residents whose yards backed up to the nearby woods. There were colorful beads in her braided hair. She appeared to have died from a single gunshot wound to the head. A middle-aged homicide police was down on one knee beside her, staring at her as if he were waiting for her to awake. His name was T.C. Cook. He was a sergeant with 24 years on the force, and he was thinking. His thoughts were not optimistic. There was no visible blood on or around the girl, with the exception of the entrance and exit wounds, now congealed. No blood at all on her shirt, jeans, or sneakers, all of which looked to be brand new. Cook surmised that she had been undressed and redressed after her murder, and her body had been moved and dumped here. He had a sick feeling in his gut, and also he realized, with some degree of guilt, a quickening in his pulse that suggested, if not excitement, then engagement. An ID on the body would confirm it, but Cook suspected this one was like the others. She was one of them. The mobile crime lab had arrived. The techs were going through the motions, but there was a kind of listlessness in their movements and a general air of defeat. The transportation of a body away from the murder site meant that there would be few forensic clues. Also, it had rained. When this happened, it was said by some techs that the killer was laughing. 2 uniformed officers stood by their cruiser. Their names were Gus Ramon and Dan Holliday. Ramon was of medium height and build. Holliday was taller and blade thin. Both were college dropouts, single, in their early 20s, and white. Both were in their 2nd year on the force, past their rookie status, but not seasoned. They had already acquired a distrust of officers above the rank of sergeant, but were not yet cynical about the job. "Look at him," said Holliday, nodding his sharp chin in the direction of Superintendent Messina and Captain Bellows. "They're not even talking to TC. They're just letting him do his thing," said Ramon. "The white shirts are afraid of him, that's what it is." T.C. Cook was an average-sized black man in a tan raincoat with a zip-in lining worn over a houndstooth sport jacket. His dress Stetson, light brown with a chocolate band, holding a small, multicolored feather was cocked just so, covering a bald head sided by clown patches of black hair flecked with gray. He had a bulbous nose and a thick brown mustache. His mouth rarely turned up in a smile, but his eyes sometimes shone brightly with amusement. "The mission man," said Holiday. "The brass don't like him, but they sure don't mess with him. Guy's got a 90% closure rate. He can do what he wants." That's Holiday all over, thought Ramon. Get results and all will be forgiven. Produce and do whatever you want. Ramon had his own rules. Follow the playbook, stay safe, put in your 25 and move on. He was not enamored of Cook or any of the other mavericks, cowboys, and assorted living legends on the force. Romanticizing the work could not elevate it to something it was not. This was a job, not a calling. Holiday, on the other hand, was living a dream, had lead in his pencil, and was jacked up big on the 23rd Psalm. A woman had wandered under the tape while they were talking, and as she approached the body of the girl and got a look at it, she vomited voluminously into the grass. Sergeant Cook removed his hat, ran a finger along the brim, and breathed deeply. He replaced the Stetson on his head, adjusted it, and allowed his eyes to search the perimeter of the scene. He turned to the man beside him, a detective named Chip Rogers, and pointed to Ramon and Holiday. "Tell those white boys to do their job," said Cook. "People regurgitating, fucking up my crime scene. If they can't keep those folks back, find some men who will. I'm not playing." Ramon and Holiday immediately went to the yellow tape, turned their backs to it, and affected a pose of authority. Holiday spread his feet and looped his fingers through his utility belt, unfazed by Cook's words. Ramon's jaw tightened as he felt a twinge of anger at being called a white boy by the homicide cop. He'd heard it occasionally growing up outside D.C., and many times while playing baseball and basketball in the city proper. He didn't like it. He knew it was meant to cut him, and he was expected to take it, but that made it burn even more. The description of the victim had been matched to a list of missing teenagers in the area. A half hour later, a man was brought to the scene to identify her. As he looked at the body, a father's anguished howl filled the night. The victim's name was Eve Drake. In the past year, 2 other black teenagers, both living in the poorest section of town, had been murdered and dumped in a similar fashion in community gardens, both discovered shortly after sunrise. Their names were Otto Williams and Ava Simmons. Like Otto and Ava, Drake's first name, Eve, was spelled the same way backward as it was forward. The press had made the connection and dubbed the events the palindrome murders. Within the department, some police had begun to refer to the perpetrator as the night gardener. Across town, at the same time the father cried out over his daughter's body, young Washingtonians were in their homes, tuning into Miami Vice, doing lines of coke as they watched the exploit of 2 hip undercover cops and their quest to take down the kingpins of the drug trade. Others read best-selling novels by Tom Clancy, John Jakes, Stephen King, and Peter Straub, or sat in bars and talked about the fading playoff prospects of the Jay Schrader-led Washington Redskins. Others watched rented VCR tapes of Beverly Hills Cop and Code of Silence, the top picks that week at Errol's Video Club, or barely sweated to Jane Fonda's Workout, or went out and caught the new Michael J. Fox at the Circle Avalon, or Caligula at the Georgetown. As these movers of the Reagan generation entertained themselves west of Rock Creek Park and in the suburbs, detectives and techs worked a crime scene at 33rd and E in the neighborhood of Greenway in southeast D.C. They could not know that this would be the last victim of the palindrome killer. For now, there was only a dead teenager, one of 3 unsolved, and someone out there somewhere doing the murders. On a cool rainy night in December 1985, 2 young uniformed police and a middle-aged homicide detective were on the scene.
Well, thank you all for coming here this evening. On behalf of Penn Faulkner,
The Folger Shakespeare Library.
And the Library of Congress.
it's been a terrific district of literature, and we invite you all across the street to the Great Hall at the Folger Shakespeare Library for a reception. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.